Hello, friends. We are back again with another episode of Soaring Through Chaos, especially during the pandemic, during Corona times. The focus here is again to really explore ways in which we all can make a difference in our own life, in the lives of people we care for, and the world at large. And here with me is another amazing person that I've known over the years, Dr. Erika Rosenberg. And she's been an inspiration for me, although we haven't met in like 6 or 7 years now. So this is catch up time for me also. So, Erica, tell us a little bit about your life journey and how we ended up meeting at the Stanford Center for Compassion. Anything you can share with us is great.
Oh, wow. My life journey. Yeah, that's the story you get depends on the angle. So thank you for giving me a lens, Shankar. Shankar, pronounce your name correctly,
Yes,
Shankar.
yes, indeed.
Because
Yes,
I
yes.
realize it's been a while since I spoke it. I've been seeing it in writing at least I still have connection with you on social media, but it's nice to see you in person. Um, So the lens that you gave me was how it came to be that we met at CCARE, the Center for Compassion and Altruism Research and Education at Stanford. We met there because you were in the teacher training program to become a compassion cultivation training teacher, which is a program that I helped develop there in 2009 with Tubtem Jinpa, Kelly McGonigal, Margaret Cullen, and Philippe Golden and his wife Vivica. I'm trying to remember. I think that was our original group. There were 5 of us originally working on that training program, and now there are a number of us who have continued to develop it and work with it. That was, for these many years. It's a wonderful secular program for training in uncovering your compassionate nature. And I think some of your other speakers have talked about what CCT, compassion cultivation training, is, but it brings together practices, meditations from Buddhism, presenting them in a way that are accessible to and people from whatever tradition they come from. But it also makes use of practices, exercises from Western psychology, in particular nonviolent communication, plus a little science from the research that's been done on meditation and in psychology and neuroscience generally. And I mention all that right now, not so much as an aside, but that it's that unique nature of CCT and the vision that Jinpa had for it, Tubtem Jinpa, the founder of CCT, that he had for it, that explains why I was involved in it, because I have this sort of dual lineage of being a researcher. I was a psychology professor for years. I study emotions and facial expression, and I have had a meditation practice since 1989. That's when I started, so over 30 years now, and teaching in that domain. And for the first 10 years or so of my, shall we say, life as a professional, new academic, whatever, those paths were separate. I had my practice and I had my academic work. But around the turn of the century, year 2000, the paths crossed interestingly, through my mentor, Paul Ekman, who is, one of the founding major figures in facial expression of emotion. He was my mentor at graduate school and still colleague and dear friend. He had been invited to go to one of the Mind and Life Institute meetings with His Holiness the Dalai Lama in Dharamsala in 2000, where they were talking about destructive emotions. That was the topic they had. And as some of the viewers might know, I'm sure you know that Mind and Life Institute has been holding these meetings since about 1990 with His Holiness the Dalai Lama, these conversations with Western thinkers and scientists from all over the world, actually, not just Western, because His Holiness is very interested in science and technology. So each meeting has had a topic. And in 2000, it was destructive emotions. And Paul Ekman, at the time, having had no contact really with Tibetan Buddhism at all, was invited because of his work as a scholar in the study of emotion. And he thought it'd be interesting to meet this man, etc. But what was not anticipated was what a profound experience he had at that meeting. And what came out of it, actually, I remember him, he called me up. He knew that when he told me about his invitation to this meeting, I told him about my meditation practice. He hadn't known that about me. So I was intrigued and excited to hear about it. But he was going very skeptical of all that, just sharing his science. But I'll never forget, I got a phone call from him. This is when I was a professor at the College of William and Mary in Virginia in the year 2000, summer. Got a phone call from Paul, and he was sitting in the in LAX at the airport on his way home from India. And he had what sounded like a conversion experience for, oh my gosh, you wouldn't believe. So he's talking about how overwhelmed it was just by meeting His Holiness, because a lot of people have this very profound experience meeting him. But also what came of it was this talk about how what we know about emotions from science and psychology could be brought together with these wonderful practices from Buddhism, and we could come up with trainings. And so one of the first things that came out of that was the Cultivating Emotional Balance Project. And I worked with Paul on the first grant to fund that. I helped initiate some of the early research on cultivating emotional balance, but left that project. I didn't stay with that project, but that was, I think, the first time Jinpa heard of me. And that was the first time these paths, the spiritual path and the scientific path, met. And since then, I've been really privileged to be able to work in that place of interface, in addition to each area individually, but to have these two parts of my life come together. Because I think, as anybody can attest, that one of there's nothing like the feeling of integration, if you will. That's these little, so that was a quite integrative thing. And it's, that's how I came to work on the development of CCT, and was part of the team who wrote that manual, and Jinpa being the main author, and did the classes, taught one of the first classes at Google in 2009. At the same time, Kelly McGonigal was teaching one at Stanford. And so, yeah, I've been doing that and other forms of that kind of interface since then, and wonderful research in that area too. But I want to give you a chance to talk. I could just go for a half hour if you want.
No, it's amazing. It's amazing. In fact, I came from a business background, entrepreneurship background, and I had studied all about psychology and neuroscience only through books. Before that, I messaged Dr. Jim Doty about when I heard about the founding, along with the Holiness and Dr. Thupten Jinpa being appointed as the main architect, or the one who would bring it all together. I was like, wow. And I had no anticipation at that time I would get involved in the real work. I just wanted to volunteer to make it successful. But then once I got into it, it was actually the beginning of my journey. I was a meditator. I was a long-term meditator, but I was not into compassion practices. I was only into mindfulness and what's in it for me kind of practices, which is quite normal. Most of us who get into meditation or any kind of psychotherapeutic intervention come to it not for fun per se, but because of our own life experiences, isn't it? I've rarely met a meditator who said, oh, I do it because it's so much exciting. Most of us come because there was something that really bothered us, or just there was that incompleteness we felt. Now I'm talking from my own experience here. And to see that integration that you talked about, and was there some kind of integration you felt when you got into these practices? And has your life shifted? Did you go through these, what I call chaotic moments or chaotic life events, through which you were able to go through and come out emerging like a butterfly, going through the cocoon of the hard challenges? You know what I mean? And this is where I hear that every single person I met at CCare and in wisdom conferences and everywhere, they had the similar experiences. That's why I'm curious about it.
Well, it's interesting because I resonated with compassion practice right away. But it's interesting to see how I got into meditation. I got into meditation not because I was looking for a spiritual journey, not even looking for self-improvement. I got into meditation because I was recommended, when I was in graduate school, I was seeing a therapist, and I was just dealing with stress, anxiety, typical kind of like I'm overwhelmed, kind of very much part of being a graduate student at the time, I think. But one of the things she recommended I try was meditation. And I had experimented with it once or twice when I was a teenager, but never really knew what I was doing. You know, I'd read Siddhartha, I tried all these things, but I'd never kind of really systematically approached it. So at the time I said, okay. And a good friend of mine had just read Sogyal Rinpoche's The Tibetan Book of Living and Dying. And so she recommended that to me, and I read that. And I also read, and there was some great instruction right in that book. And around the same time, I also started attending with the Nyingma Institute in Berkeley, because this friend of mine, with my friend Mary Gomes, a very good friend of mine, a longtime spiritual friend, she had recommended it, and a couple other people I knew were going there. So I decided to start taking some classes. And so Nyingma Institute was founded by Tartang Tulku in the early 1970s, and it's one of the first places in the West to offer Tibetan Buddhist meditation and classes and practices and workshops and retreats to Westerners. But this was back in, I guess it was 90, I started going there, maybe 89, I think it was 90. And what I was kind of, I went into all this for stress reduction, and in the process, I was so impressed by how quickly things started shifting inside me in terms of the way I looked at the world, the realizing that there are the things in the world, and then there's my reaction to it. And that what I experienced wasn't necessarily all this stuff happening to me, but I had choice. I could take intentionality, I could apply mindfulness and kindness, and just things started shifting really rather quickly for me. That enough so that I suddenly became very interested in the philosophy and the view behind it. So this sort of the entree to meditation for me was practically seeing that it made a difference in my life. And then I got curious, I was still in grad school, I'm a scholar and all that. I wanted to know, what's the system? And I was kind of blown away to find out that more than any other, at the time, I should also say, I was raised Jewish. I very reform. In grad school was very much not really practicing. It was my ethnic identity and heritage more than anything. And I'm very, very attached, I should say, to my Jewish identity. It's an important part of me, but it had never been a real strong spiritual tradition for me personally. So I wasn't really looking for a religion, and I saw Buddhism as a pathway, a path, and a view, a way of engaging with my own consciousness. And it seemed, as someone who was getting a Ph.D. in psychology, interested in thought and emotion, seeing this system that's so clearly laid out, it was like an instructor's manual for the mind, and it was like, wow, this is amazing. So I got increasingly intrigued. And one of the things that came up pretty early on, especially in Tibetan Buddhist practices, is compassion. And I learned Tonglen very early in my practices.
Wow. And could you describe Tonglen? It's one of the rare things that I've seen coming from Tibetan Buddhism.
Tonglen is a practice, a meditation practice that involves breath and imagery, and it's used to transform a sense of suffering into ease. But it's very interactive. You engage your imagination and your good-hearted intention to be of benefit to others. And what you do when you're doing Tonglen is you're using imagery and breath and intentions to reinforce your willingness to be of help. That's Jinpa talks about it as reinforcing your altruistic resolve. That's a quote from him. And I like to put that in more lay terms, is that really what you're doing is you're rehearsing helping. So what you do is you bring to mind someone, someone or some situation that's, where there's been suffering or difficulty, and you see this person in your mind. You imagine you're with them, and you see that they're suffering, and you notice how you feel that they suffer, and then you give their suffering a form. And you imagine that with this good-hearted, good intention that you have, and I don't want to teach Tonglen, I'm kind of going through it, but when you engage in this practice, you really should have, people shouldn't engage in this until they've done some work for a while with meditation and compassion and reinforced their own sense of, having a good heart and wanting others to be happy and wanting yourself to be happy and not to suffer and being moved by the suffering of others. So that you've created a pretty strong, compassionate, kind heart, partly by uncovering the innate nature of kindness and compassion that's in there. So let's say you got this warm, generative, concerned heart. You see suffering in another, and you allow some of that warmth to come on and basically send that to another, and then take away some of their suffering. People get confused that when you take away some of their suffering, and you use breath and imagery to do that somehow you're making it yours. You don't apply it to you. Rather, you bring it into this brilliant, courageous, infinitely generous heart that you have, and the suffering is eradicated, and you breathe out to them more healing light. You breathe in a little of their suffering, and you transform it into healing. So you engage imagery and breath to imagine that you can transform their suffering into ease or to healing or to relief. And in the process, you are engaging thought, imagery, breath, all these different, your imagination and your mind, and you're making use of all these different capacities that you have as a human to practice helping. That's how I like to demystify Tonglen. You're practicing helping. And if you think about it, I think it'd be very interesting if someone would do some neuroscience research on this, because we know from research on animals and some limited research on humans that when we go through our minds, either we observe another action or we rehearse an action in our mind. Let's say we might have a dance routine and we go through it in our heads, or we have scales we've learned on an instrument and we go through it in our heads, that activates the same areas of the brain that are used when we actually perform those actions. They're called mirror neuron systems, right? So it'd be very interesting to see if that's engaged with Tonglen, because what we are doing is using imagination, using maybe words, visual imagery, and breath to imagine that we're helping. So that why? Not so that we become a great practitioner of Tonglen. No, it's so that when we're in the world, we know how to do it. All of this, when I teach meditation, one of the things I say to my students is, this isn't about being a great meditator. You create these conditions on the cushion of no distraction. I'm working on noticing my thoughts, noticing where my awareness is going, whatever practice you might be doing, so that when you're off the cushion in the real test, you are better at, noticing where your mind's going, so that you can exert some choice over that, and you're rehearsing skills in meditation that will make your mind and heart better when you're living in the real world with all its challenges. That's the way I look at it.
And what you said about that earlier, the intentionality matters so much. One of the things that fascinated me, Erika, is that besides meditation and neuroscience and positive psychology, you've been engaged in many activities in real life, besides your professional life, which are very intentional. And could you get into some of these things as to what we are looking for, what people are looking for, that I hear regularly from, is that what can we do given the current situation that we are in? We seem to be in a crisis and there's no end date to it. There's no clarity. Mm-hmm. It's not even clear how much, in what ways we'll be affected, whether it's jobs or it's health or it's even a divisiveness in society. And we see that again and again in many different ways around the world. It's not one party or one organization or even one country. It's affecting us literally around the world, almost interspecies even, get rid of these and support these kinds of species. We've done that in the past. So now the question is, a lot of the intentional activities you've done, I've been a part of some of them. They also help me to cultivate what you were saying, that attitude or way of life towards approaching real problems in a very pragmatic way. Could you get into any of those practices, or your, how all this kind of intermingle with each other?
Okay, you asked a lot,
And any, I mean, it's
and
up to you because you've done so
I
much.
actually want to. I'm wondering if we could maybe go back a minute
Sure,
just to
sure.
talk about compassion a little bit more, and then
Yes.
this bigger topic of. I mean, there's a few things. There's compassion, there's intention, and then there's bringing it into the world, which I think are very linked. And I just want to say one thing about I didn't used to understand why I was so attracted to like compassion practices early in my practice, even more than loving kindness. And they're different, right? Because loving kindness is wishing another well, hoping that they be happy, wanting them to have good things, and being affiliative and generous. Whereas compassion is witnessing suffering in the world, seeing when someone else, it's connecting to whatever condition someone is in with a particular attention to suffering, noticing suffering. And some people talk about meeting suffering with kindness rather than pushing it away, even if it's aversive, realizing that, the real cornerstone of it is this sense of common humanity, realizing that I don't like to suffer, I don't want to be hurt. I know how awful that feels, and they don't either, so that connection is really important for compassion. But for me, I think I was attracted to compassion because it was real about suffering. It didn't feel Pollyannish. And I now understand that loving kindness isn't Pollyannish, but at first it felt that way to me. Just to say, may you be happy, or like something meta practice. It just didn't get into my heart the way compassion did, because it was like I understood that gut punch of suffering, just from some experiences in my own life. And also, I guess, it's not been an anecdote, it's anecdotal, but it's not been a trivial observation that Jews seem to be attracted to Buddhism as a Jewish American. And and suffering is one reason why. I think some people have written very eloquently about this. Sylvia Boorstein is one of them. But just to quote a number, like 2% of Americans are Jewish, but about 30% of American Buddhists are Jews. So it's a huge representation there. And I guess the only reason I mention it now is it has to do with this, we are a people in diaspora. There's been, it's a persecuted people for, millennia. So it's that resonating with the suffering thing, I think it's in my lineage too, that's one of the reasons why I was attracted to it. But I think the other reason I was attracted to compassion is it felt very real, that acknowledging what's really going on in the world, and that there is suffering as well as beauty and all these things. And so I wanted to say that, because I think if you've been working with compassion, you become, especially if you're lucky enough, like I was, to be working with compassion when my own life, I did get into this heavily when my dad was dying of cancer. And there were things going on in my life that led me to really dive into how to be present with suffering and transform it, or just make a big enough space around suffering and be real with it, how to be present with suffering. I think all of that, the skills that you develop then make it easier for you to be in the world with suffering, and not to look away, and to realize this is what's happening. It creates this kind of broader, clearer vision about the state of things, and an awareness of your own tendencies to avoid looking at that which is unpleasant, And when I teach compassion cultivation, I really talk about this, metaphor that comes from Tibetan Buddhism of compassion training being like warrior training, because you are doing experiments in your mind, just a standard compassion meditation where you're visualizing someone who's suffering, and you're just being present with that feeling, how it affects you, and wishing them, to be free of it. I'm not talking about Tonglen now, I'm just talking about compassion practice. That you are exercising your ability to be present with suffering. You're exercising your ability to be present with the yucky stuff. And those are really valuable skills when the world starts falling apart, right? If you live a coddled, protective inner world, it's much harder to face up to it. These are some of the obstacles we encounter when we're teaching compassion to people. I've had classes where, by the third week, we're working with loving kindness and compassion for a loved one, or the second week. And, people say, well, I like the loving kindness part, but I don't like the compassion part because I don't like to think of them suffering. It's like, well, maybe we should pick someone to work with who's less potent for us, but we need to go there. Because if you don't go there, it's got to be a little bit uncomfortable to grow in that way. It's just like with physical exercise, no pain, no gain, not that you should dive into something horrifying. We need to gauge through self-awareness, mindfulness of self, compassion for the self, to see how we are doing. We don't want to stretch ourselves too far without adequately developing self-care, our own mental hygiene, knowing when we're pushing ourselves too far, etc. So anyway, that was just a little commentary on how compassion training makes you better able to deal with difficulty when it arises. Makes you more saying, okay, I can do this. I can be with the hard stuff. Sometimes it gets overwhelming, and we need to know that when we need support. So anyway, that was one piece, and I wanted to talk about intention too. When we talk about intention or setting an intention, it kind of comes from that spiritual practice. A lot of spiritual traditions have that we set an intention for a prayer or a meditation at the beginning. Or maybe it's a spiritual journey we're on that we're setting an intention for. And the intention is, what do I hope will come of this? What do I hope I will get out of it, or what gain might come from it? And learning it from that perspective has also played a role in my understanding it kind of in a deeper lived experience way, that realizing that so much of the time we're reacting to things that happen in the world. We just almost, stimulus response, or even reflexively acting in response to what happens in the world. We feel burdened by the world, or we're attacked by the world, or if this is happening to me and that's happening to me. And we forget that we have some agency there, right? And if we set that we can make decision, like I don't know if I'm being clear, but one place where this really is manifest for me is making decisions about whether to do something, or take a project on, or go do something for somebody. And so many of the times we do something because maybe it'll look good professionally, or maybe so-and-so doesn't want to do it, or I should do it, or X, Y, or Z. And those could be good reasons. If your intention is to take the load off somebody else, great, why you're doing it. But if we have an opportunity to do anything, make a decision about doing anything, it's really important to visit why. What is my intention here? What am I hoping will come of it? And that really helps, for me at least, and I've seen it with others, drop off. Like, don't waste time on the things that aren't aligned with, intention. And it can guide your choices on what you do. And if your intention then is to make a difference, to engage in action, you can say, okay, what are the things you can make choices? What are the ways in which I can make a difference? And one thing that you alluded to earlier is working within your skill set. So educating is one thing, teaching, training, offering, one of the things I started doing in response to the pandemic, and I'm not alone, a lot of people did, is offering free teachings as much as possible to be of support to people. Sometimes just opening a Zoom room to see who needs to talk about something. Living in Oakland, California, which is a really economically diverse and racially diverse city. I've been struck by homelessness as a problem ever since I've been living here for 15 years, 19 years now, oh my God. And I love it here. And so I've a few years ago, I decided, what could I do about homelessness in addition to, you know, donations and occasional volunteering for certain organizations. My main thing that I have done is befriend people, just
Wow.
sit and talk to homeless people. And it's something that's been hard to do during the pandemic. I'm trying to figure out what form to be. And this is not to be self-congratulatory. It's nothing compared to what some people do, but I'm bringing it up since you asked me some of the things that I do. But I know from the sociological research, I know this from my own teachings, just from what I've learned, that the biggest problem, one of the biggest complaints of homeless people is that they feel invisible. So I thought one thing, you know, and instead of just walking by, occasionally throwing money, and then looking away, I decided that I would, you know, they just like me don't want to suffer. They want to, our similarities are so much greater than our differences. And so talking to them and sometimes helping them, like helping with like computer stuff to help them find an agency they needed. You know, it took me an hour on my laptop in a cafe to get one guy connected to a housing agency that he couldn't, you know, didn't have a way and wasn't getting the help. And, you know, and these are little things, but I feel like everybody can do little things like that. So I don't know if that's what you mean. And I've
Yes,
been,
yes.
you know, politically active in ways, and I'm just starting to feel that more and more of my time I want to spend on things that make a big difference in life, that are less teaching just to, I mean, I don't want to trivialize it, but just to help people have more understanding of themselves. That's great, but really working in ways and for people that are desperately in need is most appealing to me right now.
In fact, the definition of compassion includes not only the intentionality and clear focus on another suffering, but also the desire to move in the direction of action. And what I see, Erika, your work is very much in that realm of first to at least bring down the barrier that somehow I'm superior because I have a house. That person is not because they don't have a home. And
Mm-hmm.
as you clearly pointed out, Oakland has many of these divisions based on race, based on economic, disparities, and also in belief systems and lifestyles and so on. So
Mm-hmm.
it's literally a crucible for someone like you to put it in action. So it's compassion in action. And that's what I found very different about you. Each one of us has different ways of engaging. I had to actually go back to India, and now I'm traveling around to tribal areas, whether it's in Mexico or in India or in the United States, to encounter the differences, not run away, because all my life I've stayed kind of like closer to the mainstream.
Mm-hmm.
But then what is the mainstream? That's an artifact of social construct. And to
Mm-hmm.
be able to see the suffering. And today, with the pandemic, with what's going on, we are able to see the mainstream is not mainstream either. People
Mm-hmm.
suffer irrespective of their gender. And yeah,
Everybody suffers. It's just,
yeah, yes, yes, yes. We have this notion that suffering is limited to certain things. And if you're part of the in group, then you're fine, and the out group will suffer more. And these are all completely almost bogus models we have in our head, isn't it?
yeah, they are. But I also should say, I don't think people think that, I mean, there's certain palpable senses of, like, you know, not having food, not having shelter. Those are huge things that you see
Yes.
differences in class and caste and you know, socioeconomic status and all these things. But suffering is a great leveler. You know, I mean, I think, and the source of suffering, there are these external things that happen, but then so much of it is guided by how we engage with what's happening in the world, you know. And actually, if you want to go back to the Dharma, suffering is really defined by that grabbing on or pushing away of experience, not being present with what is. And, you know, it's not that you should be accepting of you should accept it and then want to change it. Great. You know, you accept it in that it's here. That's what acceptance means. It doesn't mean endorsing it, you know, from this, like, okay, here, this is the reality here. what am I going to do about it? And but suffering, you know, there's some sources that are universal, like sickness and death, and there's some sources that are societal and differentially imposed on certain groups, and there's psychological illness, which can be an unending loop of suffering in the mind. It takes many forms. There's cruelty, there's ignoring people, there's all these more subtle forms. There's these horrible things like racism, which is a scourge you know, right now in the United States. It's, to me, I'm just so burdened right now by the manifestations of institutionalized racism in this country that does not seem to have changed. You know, it's like when I was a kid in the 70s, it felt like things were starting to get better, you know, but then, you know, even in, what was it, the 80s, we had Rodney King, and this kind of thing that we saw with George Floyd in Minneapolis being basically murdered by 4 policemen is happening all the time. That, you know, this has been happening all the time. We get them on tape now, and so we know, but this has been happening all the time. How can we live in what's called a civilized country? How can we, so some of, I mean, so much of it seems to be fueled by hatred, and hatred is fueled by ignorance, right? And so what can we do to make a difference so that people don't get seduced by these simple, cruel paradigms, you know, into buying into these things that are also kind of seeping up, and they're like in the background of everything. So it's like, I don't even know right now. I mean, we can educate, we can train in compassion, we can get into the schools, but there's like systemic stuff that goes so deep in this country. And I really appreciate you talking about India. You know, you and I were talking for a while before you started recording, that this is not just an American problem.
Oh,
It's
no,
all
not at
over
all.
the world. It's all over the world.
Yeah.
And how do you affect things at that level?
In fact, 2 things come out, I mean, strike me. One is that racism is not by any means or any chance limited to the United States or any one country. If you look at matrimonial ads that come from India, they always look for fair bride. They're looking for, the skin color becomes important. And why? Just nobody even thinks about it. In fact, our songs celebrate they call it the color of silver, Chandi Jaisa, color of silver, and blue, the eyes, the color of the skies, and the hair, the color of gold. So these are actually, they're almost like, what do you call, not just memes, but these are like attributes that we look for in every human being. And it's not something new at all. The other thing that reminds me of was the word suffer in Hindi and Urdu, languages of South Asia, India, Pakistan, even Bangladesh to a certain extent. The word suffer has a different meaning. The word suffer means journey. So we say the journey of life is called Jivan Ka Safar. So, and it is very well acknowledged, as you clearly pointed out, not just in Buddhism, but essentially all the religions that came out of, actually in every single religion, it's acknowledged that life is not a Pollyanna journey of fun, not excitement to excitement to excitement, not from one Disneyland to another, but it includes the bitter and the sweet, and the good and the bad, and the the sour, and so all the tastes are included. In fact, the one taste is not, the one taste that would be neutral would be in between, the distinction we make between, I want only the happy moments but not the sad moments. I want only the pleasant emotions or good emotions, constructive emotions, but not the destructive emotions. And the between these dualities, to be able to deal with any emotion, to be able to deal with any state of the mind. And this is where I would like you to kind of say something to people who are listening. Yes, we're going through one of the most difficult times that we have seen in almost a century, probably now rivaling some of the world wars kind of situations. And yes, this is not something that one person did or whatever happened. what can we as people do? A lot of people are feeling powerless, including me many times. What can we do individually and collectively to work towards a meaningful way of life? And how can we support initiatives that can bring us all together
Mhm.
and make this a, we don't want to go back to the old world, which seemed to be perfect, because that's what created the current reality.
Mhm.
So
Well, you,
what
you
are your
speak to
thoughts on it?
probably the most important thing is that we can't go back to the old world, and it's about going forward, right?
Yeah.
And you know, the extent, I actually think compassion training is really helpful here because it helps you be present with all of it, right? The yuckiness and the beauty and the boredom, and even if we, before getting into the world crisis situation, I just want to go back to something you were talking about. It's not Pollyannish. It's not one of the things that I think Pema Chodron writes about beautifully is that this in between uncertain state, that's it. That's what life is, right? That we keep
Yes.
thinking, get to that place where it all settles down and it's all perfect. And we don't, we're on a journey. And, and I loved what you said about the meaning of the word suffering. It means journey, when you translate what we call suffering, it's more like a journey. And practitioners talk about putting everything on the path that we're like, okay, I'm awake. I have an open heart. I'm trying to be as kind and aware as possible. Difficult stuff happens. How do I navigate that? I mean, to me, my definition, people ask, what is happiness or whatever? For me, it's being increasingly okay and able to deal with what life puts on my plate, just to navigate it. Being okay, I don't mean endorsing it, but finding a way through it. Now, how to move ahead, I think the most important thing are those qualities of knowing how you are when you enter any situation. Being mindful is important. Know how to calm and be calm. Know how to stabilize your mind and be calm, and see, be awake to see what is happening, to notice how things move you when they're happening. If something's not right, notice that. And instead of just wanting to push that away, asking yourself, what can I do about it? Being spacious in terms of, okay, it might be rocky or whatever, but I have enough room to kind of move through this. Know when you hit your limits. Set intentions. So setting an intention, maybe you've decided, well, I really want to do something today. I might want to choose a high level thing, right? That's important to me, but something today, I want to find one opportunity to do something beneficial for the world, or one opportunity to do something that's good for somebody on the street, or is going to address this racial strife in America. And let's say I'm just talking out of my own head, but
Yeah.
I like pick something scalable that serves a bigger goal. And intentionality doesn't guarantee that something will happen, but it kind of paves the way. You're kind of plowing the fields, making that groove so that if you plant the seeds, something will grow out of it. So I think right now, for any thinking, caring person who has any wherewithal, is to think about what matters, not just for yourself, but for the world,
Yeah.
and probably the biggest teaching element there is this notion of common humanity, and that in spite of all the superficial differences that we have, that underneath it, we're all just trying to get through this thing called life, and that is so much more powerful than any of the differences. And that's the kind of thing that can allow you to sit at the table with someone with a completely different viewpoint, and one thing that I work on constantly, and I fail and I get back up on the horse, is being able to have dialogues with people who I know are politically on a really different place from me, or economically in a really different place from me, and try to hear, try to understand, and try to be kind and compassionate. And that's, I don't know, maybe I'm rambling. I'm just talking about certain qualities that you can reinforce so that you can engage better, and then you can have planful action. What is something I can do? And it might involve stepping outside your comfort zone, and And one of the things that we work with compassion cultivation is getting closer to suffering, which isn't always comfortable. And people find that when they step outside their comfort zone and do something different, that might be of benefit to somebody who you might not normally engage with or even think about, that it is enormously rewarding. Not that it needs to be rewarding every time. It could be frustrating. You get pissed. You could get disappointed. You could lose hope. But anyway,
No, what you're
I'm
saying
still
is,
figuring this out for myself, you know?
and I really like this humility, Erika, coming from you and from almost every single person I talk to. They are all known in their own right in their particular field, whether it's compassion or it's neuroscience or it's conscious entrepreneurship. But each one came to that thing. When I'm encountering this humongous thing today, the crisis that we are in, no known methods are a guaranteed solution. And if it was, then we would just have a computer do it,
Mhm.
step A, step B, step C. And it's not. If it was already something that was fully understood and known, then there's no challenge in it really. And then we're already comfortable with it one way or the other. It's this discomfort that we are all feeling, approaching, not running away from. Because every one of us, in one way or the other, are now encountering discomfort in our life, whether
No.
it's not being able to get out of the house, as simple as that, or not having food, or not being seen by the medical system or any other, uh, the people who are walking on the streets of Mumbai all the way to Bihar in India or in Africa, people not even getting, some countries have lockdown, but there are no test kits at all in some places.
No, I
So
know. I know plenty of people who had symptoms early on and couldn't get tested. I mean,
here
actually
in
one
Mexico,
thing,
that's partly true also. In
it's
India, I know it's a fact. But the reality is, it's very easy to say, oh, the government didn't do this for me, or somebody else didn't do this for me. Part of it may be even true. But the reality is, what can I do that small act? Or how can I move towards integration? How can I move towards solving the problem rather than pinning the blame on somebody and labeling? It's so easy. All of us get into this. It's very convenient. It's a convenient truth to
well,
label somebody.
no, labels and bias and all that happens because it's mental shorthand for us. It's much easier to blame somebody else. It's much
Yes.
easier to not see a person but see their racial group. I mean, these are
Mm,
some of the fundamental lessons of common humanity, and part of it how it's supported by our cognitive architecture. We like shorthand. We
we like
like to
children.
make it easy, but life ain't easy. It's not. I'm trying to get out. The sun is like coming in my window. Blind. But one thing that I will say is the thing about pandemic is that it has created a very unusual situation for us in the world, and that's one of shared grief. That kind of
Mhm.
goes across. The grieving definitely is worse. Is correlated. The losses have been correlated with economic issues and racial issues disproportionately hitting certain populations. However, everybody is being affected by this. Everybody is losing people in their lives from this. Everybody's experiencing a loss in the way they live, and so it's incredibly sobering. It's also a time that we have this opportunity to connect to everybody else on the planet that we don't normally think about. That
Yeah.
there is something that we are all going through at the same time, even though the stories might be different. And in this slowing down period that we have of not living life the way we had become accustomed to, it's like a cold wake-up call, slap in the face. Will this planet be around? Will we be around? We're not invulnerable, it seems, right?
Yeah.
And I like to visit an optimistic view of that when systems fail and fall apart, which is what is happening now. Things are falling apart in many countries, not all. I'm very US centered right now because I'm in the middle of it. I know that. And I wish I
Yeah.
lived in New Zealand, but I don't. And you know, but it's when things crumble and systems prove that they're not working, that there's an opportunity for new things to be formed, you know, and so that, you know, to borrow a lyric from the Grateful Dead, something new is waiting to be born. And something new is waiting to be born. And so I like to remember that and realize that we, you know, there's all these adages, be the change you want to see in the world. And now's the time for us to step up and do something. And as a compassion educator, this pandemic has been a great opportunity to reach out and help people who are suffering, you know, and in as many ways as I can. And it feels like, okay, that's an easy one for me to be of help. Stay with my skill set. Now I'm starting to reach out, like, what can I do in terms of the things that are a little bit further outside of what I normally do? How can I stretch to make a difference for the lives of my children, for the lives of people in my city, for the lives of people all over the planet? And if everybody does, like, even just lots of little tiny things, the effect is huge. The effect
That's
is
huge.
Yeah.
And I'm so grateful that with this note, I want everybody to know that if anybody is looking for an expert who has all the answers, I don't think there's one right now. And even the greatest spiritual leaders, religious leaders, or political leaders, one way or the other, are confessing that. It's almost like a confession, you know what I mean? People are, initially they all started with, I know this will do it, this will do it. And then there was that sober realization, no, this is what I think will do it, or this is what I guess will do it. Even whether scientists talking about vaccinations, or we have all come to the sobering realization that we are all in it together. We are all in the midst of storm, this huge storm, in different boats or in different viewpoints. So again, if people have more questions, please, I would welcome that. Is it okay, Erika, to give your any particular contact information, and I'll seek that from you
Well,
later?
you can look at my website,
Yes.
erikarosenberg.com, and that you can contact me through there and see what I'm up to. And you could also follow me. I have a professional page on Facebook, and right now doing a lot of live streamed events that are things that have emerged out of this, you know, hosting gatherings for people. And to Saturday, I was invited to share poetry and music, and I'm reading the poems of Rumi and performing with a friend of mine, Joe Kyle Jr., who's a bass player, and we're going to be doing Rumi with bass, and so that'll be interesting. A little diversion and a little entertainment, but I don't know. I'm just, yeah. So if you're interested in finding out what I'm about, you can go to my website and send me a note, and
on every social media, I'm going to share the relevant contact information, particularly a website and maybe a Facebook handle, Facebook page. And this is an ongoing.
Facebook page. Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah. My professional Facebook page. Yeah, you can run this by me later. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I will talk to you. And this is an ongoing dialogue. Anybody who thinks we all have all the answers, no, we don't. But at the same time, each one of us can contribute in small ways. And if you have more questions, we welcome that, so that we can learn from each other. Together, we can look at the problems. And I'm grateful. This is a great way of really catching up after all these years, Erika. And I'm grateful for all the things I keep learning from everybody.
Thank you. May you be well. May all beings be well, be free from suffering. May the world heal.